Hello everyone, my name is Grayzine and welcome to another Age of Wonders 4 deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at skirmishers, and I mean all skirmishers. The last one of these I did tier 3 shield units just because I was really curious about the stat differences in them. And then I kind of got a little carried away and made a spreadsheet of every skirmisher in the game, every ability and stat they have, so I could compare them for you guys. So the format of this video is going to be skirmishers by tier. So we're going to take a look in the compendium briefly at each of the skirmishers of tier 1. Then we'll flip on over to my spreadsheet and look at the differences side by side of them. And then I'll give you my thoughts on the skirmishers of that tier, and then we'll move on to tier 2. So this will be a little longer than my tier 3 shield unit video, but that's because there are a lot more units in here. Just as an upfront note, as of the announcement of the third DLC, there will be at least 2 more skirmisher units in the game. However, at the time of recording, that expansion is not out yet, and I do not want to talk about those skirmishers because they are not necessarily in their final state. So if I try to do any sort of comparisons of their stats or abilities, that may change before the DLC comes out. So we're just going to focus on the ones that are in the game as of the Dragon Dawn DLC. The first skirmisher unit we're going to be looking at is the Tier 1 Sunderer. This is a well-known skirmisher unit, especially after a certain someone on YouTube popularized a build where you use only these Sunderers and win in every auto combat. So this one has 0 armor or resistance. It has 50 health, which is about normal for a Tier 1 unit. It has a repeating 12 strength melee strike and a javelin throw that will sunder defense. There's no chance of it, it just does it, which is quite useful. This is barbarian culture, so it has the primal strike. The first melee attack it deals in a fight deals +8 blight damage, so you are encouraged to get into melee combat at least one time with the skirmisher and not strictly use them as a harassing force with the javelins. They have slippery and swift. This will be the last time I mention this because every single skirmisher unit that exists as of this video has slippery and swift. That's their thing. They ignore slowing terrain in combat, and they do not trigger opportunity attacks. So they can run in very close, attack in melee, or throw their ranged weapon, which they all have at least one option for that. And then when they are engaged in melee, they can back out and then throw again or run around and flank. These are truly a unique unit type in this game. They're the only ones that are guaranteed to be able to perform this sort of hit and run tactic. So do keep that in mind. We won't be discussing the slippery and swift specifically again after this point. Next up is the Tier 1 Slither Hatchling. This is a DLC unit, so if you don't have Dragon Dawn, you will not be able to acquire this unit. This one has a repeating melee strike with blight damage attached to it and a venom spit that does a fair amount of blight damage, so watch out for those pesky undead that resist it. And they have a 90% chance of inflicting poison, which is a very solid percent chance. They also come in at more health than the Sunderer, plus 1 armor and 1 resistance. They also have Draconic Rage. When they have a lower hit point total, so when it reaches 60% or lower, it gets extra damage, so they just get enraged upon low health. These are really solid Tier 1 skirmisher units. These units also evolve into the regular Slither, which I believe is a Tier 3, and we will get to that later on in the video. Next up is the Tier 1 Lesser Snow Spirit, coming in at 55 health, 1 armor, 1 resistance. These guys have 6 frost resistance and -6 fire weakness, so do watch out. They take 41% extra damage from fire, including when you include this resistance. So they take almost, 1.5 times damage from fire attacks, so they can die very quickly to that. They have a really cool ranged attack. This is the first one we've seen in this list so far that has a cooldown. They cannot infinitely use this ranged attack. They have to either wait around or close the distance and do melee for a while. But this has a small chance of freezing a unit completely, and if it fails, it slows them. Unfortunately, at a range of 4, if you slow them, they're still going to be able to get to you and probably get 2 hits off. But the frozen can really turn the tide of a battle if you can manage to get a unit or 2 frozen with these guys' ranged attack. We also have the Entwined Protector, 50 health, 1 armor, 1 resistance. These units truly all have a different combination of health, resistance, and armor, which is fine, but makes it hard to compare them. This one has a little bit of resistances and weaknesses built in as well. This has only physical damage in its melee strike and its poison strike, which is a little strange, but it does have a 90% chance of inflicting poison with the needles that it throws. This one also does evolve at champion rank into the Entwined Protector, a pretty solid tier 3 unit. In my opinion, not the best of them, but certainly has this unique ability to heal others, so do keep that in mind. Once the Entwined Thrall evolves into the Protector, it is definitely not a skirmisher unit anymore. It loses its ranged attack and is strictly a melee unit at this point. Alright, welcome everybody to my spreadsheet. So this has all of the skirmisher units in the game, including unit source, tier, HP, defense resistance, movement, status resistances, elemental resistances, basic attacks melee, basic attacks ranged, active abilities and other attacks, where they're produced by, and any other traits that you need to know about. Again, they all have slippery and swift, as you can see, so we're not going to talk about that at this point. So let's take a look at what I have highlighted here. Disregard that I had the gremlin highlighted a minute ago. So these are all of the tier 1 skirmisher units. So as you can see, they come from completely different places. We have the barbarian culture. This is the only cultural skirmisher unit at this time, though in the next expansion that's coming out in early November, there will be, I think, 2 more in the new culture that's coming. Every other one comes from typically tomes, although there is one like this Slither that only comes from evolution. So we have the Sunderer. Again, this is the weakest one in terms of health because it has only 50 health and no resistances or defense at all. It has no resistances or weaknesses to anything, so this is pretty much just exactly 50 HP and that's it. So you have to be very careful with these units. The Slither comes from the Tier 1 Nature and Chaos Tome of Evolution, which is a Dragon Dawn DLC tome. This is the beefiest of the skirmisher units at Tier 1, having 60 health and 1 defense and 1 resistance, so much tankier than the other units. Just that little bit of health and those resistances are going to help it quite a bit. Snow Spirit comes from the Tome of Cryomancy, has a little bit less health but still has resistances. Be aware that at this point we're now getting into having elemental weaknesses and resistances, so watch out for that. And then the Entwined Thrall, low health, but it does have that 1 armor and 1 resistance to help it out a little bit. You can see down here they all share a repeating 12 damage attack. Some of them are split up in different types, but they're all 12 total. These 3 have a repeatable ranged attack that they can use constantly, where the Lesser Snow Spirit actually has a cooldown of 2 turns for this freezing burst because it can freeze. Do note that the Sunderer and Entwined Thrall's ranged attacks do the most damage of the group. Also note that the Sunderer and Slither Hatchling are produced in cities, while the Snow Spirit and Entwined Thrall are summoned via overworld summon spells. So the benefit of the Snow Spirits and Entwined Thralls is that these can be summoned further away from where your cities are, up at the front lines where the combat's occurring. These 2 must be produced at home and then taken to the battles. In terms of traits, there's quite a lot of things going on here. They all kind of have some different stuff going on, though interestingly, all 3 of these ones do actually evolve. There are some other random sort of minor bonuses that some of them get. For instance, this one's floating, so it can move through terrain a little easier. The Entwined Thrall has Forest Walk and Forest Camouflage. So just little kinds of things like that that typically don't mean a lot unless your entire army is built around that premise. And again, the Sunderer, like the Bastion unit in my Tier 3 Shield unit video, has access to racial traits and racial transformations. So in a vacuum, it is the weakest, in my opinion, of these skirmisher units. But once you start getting racial traits and racial transformations in there, you're going to have a lot stronger of a unit. Racial traits will come in immediately. Racial transformations, of course, will take some time to build up. So, in my opinion, which of these are the strongest? Well, that's an extremely difficult thing to decide. I think the later the game goes on, the more powerful Sunderers are going to be compared to the rest because of racial transformations that may have occurred. They may have bonus health, bonus damage, bonus resistances by this point that the others don't get access to. In a vacuum, the Slither Hatchling is probably the best of the units. It still has those slippery and swift traits that you're looking for, but it's got low maintenance, it evolves, it gets stronger if it has less health, it has more health than your other units, and it does a lot of damage. Just be aware that it does do a lot of blight damage, so there's definitely going to be times when this is not the right choice for the job. Now on to Tier 2 units. We're going to start with the Gremlin, our twitchy little fiery friend here, whose eyes seem to look in different directions sometimes. We have only 55 health, 1 armor, 1 resistance, so really no step up from the Tier 1 units. This one does a 14 repeating attack and has a 20 damage ranged attack. This is a really cool ability because it turns your enemy 180 degrees around, making it very easy to get a smorgasbord of flanking attacks off on that enemy. These ones also have displacement, so when they are hit, they will teleport to a random place within 2 hexes. Sometimes this will get them killed because they may teleport into the enemy ranks rather than back to safety, so do watch out for that. And the only other tier 2 skirmisher unit at this point in the game is the Floral Stinger, coming in at 70 health with 1 armor, 1 resistance. This is a much tankier unit. However, this is, as far as I can tell, exclusively a combat summon. I haven't found a way to get these on the overworld. If you have ever figured that out in some way, let me know. These guys have a repeating 10 damage melee strike, not particularly strong, though they are demolishers for some reason. And they have a ranged poison spore attack. This has a cooldown, however, but it is very strong. 20 blight damage with a 90% poison chance is pretty good. They have charge resistance for some reason. They also have healing roots. They actually heal if you don't use all their action points. And they're hyper aware it's immune to flanking because, again, it has no front or back. It's just a plant. It is naturally permanently slowed, so it has slow movement and cannot do retaliation attacks. Very strange, this unit. So it's always aware of all of the space around it. It can't be flanked, but it also can't retaliate. It's also very slow to get into melee, so you probably want to keep this one in the back for a range attack at first, and then close into melee to bog the enemies down with your combat summon. So here are our 2 tier 2 skirmisher units. The Gremlin comes from the tier 2 Chaos Tome of Mayhem. The Floral Stinger comes from the tier 2 Nature Tome of Fertility. So between the 2 health totals, very strange analysis here because this one's a combat summon. It has bizarre stats. So this is really a bad example of a skirmisher unit's stat line, the Floral Stinger, but it's such an interesting unit. So let's talk mostly about the Gremlin here. It has a higher damage basic repeating melee attack, 14 rather than 12, and this is the first one that has included fire. It also has this 20 damage, 10 physical, 10 fire range attack that turns the enemy around. And the interesting thing is this pretty powerful attack is not on a cooldown. You can do this every turn, and this turning 180 degrees could be very, very interesting, especially by turning things like shielded units around. They don't benefit from their shield ability if they are being flanked. The shield gives them +3 defense if they are not flanked. So this is a great way to turn any enemy, including their tank units, into a squishier target. This is a overworld summon, and they have that displacement ability, and that's it. Other than that, they're pretty basic, but very, very interesting strategic options are opened up by this behind you attack. The Floral Stinger is, of course, the combat summon. It has all of these strange abilities that we've talked about, but again, this one's stats are strange because it's a combat summon. So which of these is the more powerful one? Honestly, it's still the Gremlin. The Gremlin's turning enemies around 180 degrees is very, very cool, and it does a pretty good amount of damage. The Floral Stinger is definitely valuable, though. I've used this many times in combat. You target a spot with any sort of foliage in it, so flowers or trees or a bush or something like that in combat. So you can't summon it anywhere, but it can typically has lots of options. And once you've summoned it, you can run it into the enemy and bog them down with this combat summon. The only unfortunate thing about it is that it doesn't get those opportunity attacks, so it's not quite as effective as a blocker as you'd probably like it to be. Alright, we are now on to our tier 3 skirmishers. This will be the last tier we have. There are not currently tier 4 skirmishers in the game, and there are no mythic units that are skirmishers because, well, they're mythic units. That's their designation. So the Slither is the first one we're going to talk about. This is the evolution of the Slither hatchling. You can see this creepy little smooth boy turns into this sort of proto-dragon alligator looking thing. I think this model is quite cool, actually. Again, this is a Dragon Dawn DLC unit. This one has 90 health, 3 and 3 for defenses, and 3 native status effect protection. So we're starting to get pretty powerful here. This unit could hold the front line for you if you need it to. It has a repeating melee attack of only 15, so not amazing, but its Venom Spit here doing 24 damage has Demolisher and can poison and has no cooldown. This doesn't have a chance of poisoning, it just inflicts poison, which is quite valuable. It has charge resistance, demolisher, it has that draconic rage again, and low maintenance. It also has slip away. If this unit ever gets to 0 health, it will actually teleport away and heal a little bit once per battle. Now, same with the gremlin, this unit could teleport to a location that's not particularly helpful, but at least there's that chance that it survives the fight. Alright, on to one of my very favorite units in the game. This is the Inquisitor. This is possibly my favorite of the skirmisher units that exist in the game at the moment. The Inquisitor comes in with 80 health, 2 and 2 in terms of its defenses, and 3 native protection against status effects, so a little bit weaker than the draconic unit Slither we just saw. This has a repeating 16 damage melee strike with a small amount of spirit damage, and it can also condemn enemies, which has synergy with other sorts of these kinds of spirit-based units. It has this Bolt of Judgment. This is its ranged attack. It shoots a crossbow for quite a lot of damage, and it has a 90% base chance of inflicting stun, so very good against Tier 1 and Tier 2 units. Once you start trying to stun Tier 3 and above, you're going to have a lesser and lesser chance of it actually working. These ones also have True Sight, which is quite interesting. They can see invisible and camouflage units, and they have Zeal, so they get this little bit of extra spirit damage on their attacks, and it's doubled if the enemy is condemned. So they can enhance their own damage against units by hitting them in melee, condemning them, and then subsequent attacks will do more spirit damage. The real value of these guys is this Bolt of Judgment with a chance of stunning. It's very powerful, and a 90% base chance of stunning is very high. This can turn the tide of a battle quite easily. Next up, we have the Snow Spirit, the older brother of the lesser Snow Spirit after it's evolved. This comes in at 90 health with 3 and 4 in terms of its defenses, 3 armor, 4 resistance. It is quite weak to fire, but fortunately this 4 resistance helps cancel that out quite a bit, so it's only at really a -2 in fire. With Frost, because it has 4 resistance and 6 frost resistance, it only takes 35% damage from frost attacks, so you're not going to kill this guy with things like Warlocks or Necromancers very easily. This one has a repeating melee strike at 16, with quite a lot of the damage is tied up in frost, so be aware if you're fighting something that resists that. This guy is going to take a long time to do any serious damage. Much like his smaller little brother, he's got a ranged freezing attack that has a 90% chance of inflicting frozen, but does have a cooldown. This is very interesting because the lesser Snow Spirit's freezing burst has only a 30% chance. You cannot count on this ability to work, it's just a nice blessing when it does. The Snow Spirit has a 90% chance, so you can actually kind of plan your turns around assuming you're going to get a frozen effect on some enemies if they're a low enough tier and don't have any extra status effect protection. Like a lot of the elemental sort of spirit units, this one has a teleportation ability. It teleports to a hex and deals damage around it and has a small chance of freezing, and on fail it still slows them, which is quite helpful. Next up is the Frost Wyvern. This is a cool unit actually. This is very cool. 90 health, 3 and 3. It has the native 3 status effect protection. I think they all have that. And it has a little tiny bit of fire weakness, but again, its native resistance makes it so that it still has a 10% protection against fire. Again, though, with frost, it doesn't take that much damage from frost. It is a repeating 15 damage attack. It also has the freezing burst range attack that has a 90% frozen chance. This attack is identical to the Snow Spirit's attack. Like a lot of the other Dragon Dawn units, this one has Demolisher, Draconic Rage, low maintenance, and it also has charge resistance, which is quite helpful. And the last of the skirmisher units that we have in our tier 3 list is the River Troll, another one of my favorites. She has a native 100 health, but only 3 armor and 2 resistance, so her skin is not particularly resistant to elemental attacks, so do watch out for that. She has no weaknesses or resistances to any sort of elemental effects other than that, so do be careful. She is vulnerable to magic. She has a repeating physical damage that does have a bleeding chance. This is quite helpful. This Razor Net is really quite fun. It's got a 20 damage attack. It immobilizes with a 90% chance of doing so. And it also has Demolisher for some reason. If you wanted to throw your net at a wall, you can do that. Don't know why, but it does that. She also has charge resistance. I assume thematically it's because she also has like a spear type thing, which is kind of neat. She has Demolisher, and she has natural troll regeneration, which is very cool. So she heals 10% of her maximum health each turn as temporary hit points, and she heals faster on the overworld map. Do note, if she takes fire damage, she stops regenerating for a turn. So I think they tried to balance the fact that she has more health and natural regen, which is going to be 10 health, with the fact that she has not phenomenal defenses here. So she may take a bit more damage, but she can retreat and heal back up because of the slippery and swift. She can just get out with no opportunity attacks. All right, we're back to the spreadsheet. So let's start with the Slither. This unit cannot be manufactured or summoned in any way other than it evolving from a Slither hatchling. This makes this unit a pain in the butt to get a hold of, because if you really want one and it's late game, you have to summon tier 1 Slither units and then protect them until they evolve. They're taking the spot of a more powerful unit, and it takes quite a while for them to get to the Slither. They are pretty darn strong though, however, with their 90 health and 3/3 defenses, and they also of course have this repeatable strong attack. They have the ability to teleport away from danger with a slip away, which is a mini revive. They have the Draconic Rage, so they do extra damage at low health. So these are really, really great units. It's just that they're really hard to get. The Inquisitor is an interesting unit on this list because it is a tier 3 unit that comes from a tier 2 tome. It comes from the tier 2 Order Tome of the Inquisition. It does have weaker stats than the other Skirmisher units on this list, with only 80 health and less defense and resistance than the others. It has no weaknesses or resistances elemental-wise, but it does have the native 3 status resistance that they all get. This one has a decently strong melee repeating attack and a very strong active ability, its range attack, that has a 90% stun chance, though it does have a 2-turn cooldown, so if it doesn't work, you kind of have to throw that strategy out of the window unless it's going to be a really long battle. They have this Zeal and True Sight, which are helpful, but they're not something you really want to plan your entire army around unless you're already going with a Zeal-based strategy. The Inquisitor may have these weaker stats because it is a racial unit, in fact, so it does get the racial bonuses, at least I'm pretty sure. Let me know in the comments if I got that wrong, but I'm pretty sure they get racial transformations and racial bonuses from your faction. So that is a good point in their favor. They can outscale some of these other units with those, potentially. The Snow Spirit comes from the tier 3 Shadow Tome of the Cold Dark, or evolves from the Lesser Snow Spirit. They have really good stats here. They actually have the highest, 90 with 3 defense and 4 resistance, the only unit in this list to have that. They are weaker to fire, watch out for that. They have a repeating attack with lots of frost damage built in, and they have that incredible 90% chance of freezing, kind of like the Inquisitor. This can really make or break a fight. This is on a cooldown, however, and so is their teleport. Though the teleport is also very, very useful, this guy being a little bit tankier means that he can actually survive teleporting into the middle of enemies to freeze them and then try to attack them. This is an overworld summon. Oh, I should have mentioned the Slither is only an evolution. Inquisitors are produced in the cities, and the Snow Spirit is an overworld summon. This one also has bonuses for being magic origin. It's elemental, so it's immune to bleeding, poisoned, and diseased, and it has floating. The Frost Wyvern comes from the tier 3 Nature and Chaos Tome of the Dragons that gives you a bonus building called the Wyvern Eyrie. Constructing that in your city allows you to begin producing these wyverns. In my opinion, the Frost Wyvern and the Fire Wyvern are great units because you can tailor which one you build to the enemy you're facing. Do you need frost damage or fire damage? Typically, one of those is going to be more useful than the other one. It's got great stats, 90 health, 3/3. It has a very small fire weakness, not enough to make a huge deal. It does have this identical freezing burst attack as the Greater Snow Spirit has. This unit is produced in the city and can also evolve from the fledgling wyverns that you can summon. It also benefits from Draconic Rage and low maintenance. Now onto the River Troll, our final skirmisher unit here. The River Troll comes from Ancient Wonders that you have connected to your city. They will then appear in your Rally of Lieges. That's really the only surefire way to get them. I'm sure there are weird events or something that can give them to you, but they're not summonable via any sort of magic. These guys have 100 health, but they do have this only 2 resistance, so watch out for that. They have the natural regeneration, which can be huge, especially on a skirmisher unit that can just get right out of the fight with its slippery and then heal up in the back. It has this net attack. It always hits, and it has a 90% chance of immobilizing with a 1-turn cooldown. So you can use this every other turn. So you can run in, hit with the physical attack that has a bleeding chance, back up the next turn, throw a net. Next turn, go back in, hit, try to get more bleeding. So that's a very, very helpful ability. I probably should have put bleeding in here. There we go, have that updated. So let's talk about these units here. Obviously, the Inquisitor is the weakest of the pack in a vacuum, but again, with racial transformations and racial passive abilities, this unit could be outscaling these other units. But in a vacuum, I think this is... It's a weaker unit, but the stun ability is not to be underestimated. If this stun ability goes off, you're in good shape. It's actually the same with the Frost Wyvern and the Snow Spirit. I've had fights where I've had these two kinds of units infinitely locking down bigger threats while I deal with something else. River Trolls are really fun units and can splash into most armies, and they have a function. They can either hold down their charge units with immobilization. They are charge resistant, so they are actually quite good at going toe-to-toe with knights and things like that. And the bleeding chance is always helpful, even though by the time tier 3 units are fighting, the bleeding damage isn't a huge part of their health pool. The Slithers are very powerful units, especially with all of these abilities they have here, including Slip Away, Draconic Rage. They have 3 and 3 as well as the 90 health, so these are very powerful units. They also have this repeatable ranged attack here that doesn't have a cooldown, so you can use it turn after turn after turn. So in my opinion, the Inquisitor is the strongest unit in the very late game of this pack of units here, because it should scale well if you've been using racial transformations. Otherwise, I would say if you can get Slither hatchlings to evolve into Slithers, you've got a really great unit here. But other than that, I'm a huge fan of the Snow Spirits and the Earth Spirits and that kind of thing. I like having armies with lots of those elementals because they bring different tools to the table. The Frost Wyvern is okay. I do like this unit. It's not particularly weak to anything, which is helpful. And the River Troll is honestly, like I said, a very splashable unit into most fights. So I would say, in my opinion, it's probably the Inquisitor and the Slither are the strongest of these units, though you have to wait for the Inquisitor to scale and you have to wait till you get Slithers from evolution. Alright everyone, here's the full spreadsheet. I will probably put a link to this spreadsheet read-only in the description of this video so people can follow along with me and see all this information that I've planned out here. If for some reason you are as interested in comparing the stats and abilities of units as I am, then you're welcome to take a look at this. So I hope you've enjoyed this video I've made. Like I said, I'm not going to be talking about the skirmisher units coming in the next expansion because we don't know if they're balanced to their final form yet, so it's not worth talking about them yet. Once they come out though, it'll be interesting to see how they compare with the units in this list, and I will be adding them at a future time. So thank you everybody so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this deep dive into all skirmisher units. So if you have any suggestions for what you would like to see me do next in this sort of deep dive series, then please let me know in the comments. I'd be happy to see your suggestions. I'm going to keep playing the game. I'm going to keep putting out the series on YouTube. Like and subscribe if you haven't already. Check the link in the description for my Patreon if you'd like to support the channel for more Age of Wonders 4 content and deep dives. And I will see you in my next series. Thank you again for watching.